I have never claimed to be a woodworker. Matter of fact, up until a few years ago, I could barely nail 2 2x4s together. But that all changed when I bought my first CNC router. I did not know what in the hell I was doing, but I knew I wanted to make stuff. I didn't know why. I just felt it in my DNA. I've always liked working with my hands, and I just wanted to make stuff. And I started off with the usual, making coasters and signs and 3D carvings and whatnot. And then I found myself on YouTube trying to find some ideas on what to make, and I stumbled across Broinwood and his wonderful inlaid cutting boards. And I instantly knew right then that's what I want to do. And so I read up on the V-carve inlay technique and started making inlays, and found myself going back and forth to the hardwood store about once a week because I was making lots of mistakes. Matter of fact, I've had some pretty expensive bonfires in my backyard from incinerating all those mistakes that I made, but I kept at it. And after a little while, I stopped making so many mistakes. I haven't perfected it yet, but I'm a lot better than I used to be. It was just because of perseverance. And I started posting stuff that I made on my Facebook group that I'm a member of, and I got lots of kudos and accolades and lots of questions about how I did things, and it was requested that I make some videos. So here we are. Now I'm a YouTuber. Y'all bear with me and be patient. I'm going to try my best to explain everything as carefully as I can, so maybe I can pass along a little wisdom and save you guys some bonfires too. The cutting board I am making in this video is for a friend. He is an avid deep-sea fisherman, and he is also a woodworker. He's a woodworker, I'm not. But he really digs the stuff that I do, that I'm able to do with the CNC machine, and I've showed him some of the videos that have inspired me, and he saw Broinwood's YouTube video of the shipping whale, and he really liked it, and that's one of my favorites. And because he's a deep-sea fisherman with a nice boat, I thought I'd make him one as a housewarming, and so here we are. Now, I did not want to copy exactly what Broinwood did. I thought that would maybe be an insult, and plus I didn't want to come off as a copycat. So I purchased the vector from the designer who originally created it, and the link to his pages will be down in the description below. Please check him out. Super nice guy. And I changed it up a little bit, added some stuff to it to make it mine. So I hope you enjoy what I've done with it. One of the main differences that you'll see between my board and Broinwood's board is his board is made out of hard maple, and I'm making mine out of black walnut. And it's quite difficult to get any kind of decent contrast when you're using all dark woods. So I had this idea of making a background inside of the board of the black walnut, and it kind of gives it this picture frame effect that I'm really digging. So what you're seeing here now is I'm creating the blank for the hard maple inlay that will be the background to that board. One thing that I'll do when I make a cutting board, I'll make the board and I'll let it sit on a shelf for several weeks so it will acclimate to the environment. If you've ever done anything like this before, you know how easily it'll warp. And I live in the deep south where it's generally anywhere from 80 to 100% humidity every day. And man, oh man, is it a pain in the butt to try to keep wood stabilized in that kind of environment. And I've had really good luck I'll buy my wood from the hardwood lumber yard, and I'll let that sit uncut on a shelf for 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. Then I'll make the cutting board, And then I'll also let it sit a few weeks, and then I can come back and surface it off, and it'll generally hold its shape. Not all the time. I had some difficulties with this board because the weather got a little funky around here, and I had some rainy days, and the board would warp to the point where I just couldn't work that day because, as y'all know, you need a nice flat surface for, to do these inlays so they'll stay consistent. So I'd let the rain dry up and give it about a day, and when I went back out in my shop, it had settled back down into a nice flat surface. Now, if you've studied the V-carve inlay technique, there is what I, in my opinion, call a misnomer that you have got to have a glue gap between the inlay and the pocket, and you don't. The reason being is you're dealing with ingrain, and ingrain's like a sponge. And if you see the amount of glue I'm using here, you'll see that I have barely any squeeze out because that ingrain is going to soak up that glue, and it'll seep up into the inlay and into the pocket, and it'll help the inlay bond to the pocket. Not only that, but my settings, I have found the settings to where I have zero glue gap whatsoever. Now it's just tricky because if you go too far, then you won't have nice seams on your inlay, and if you don't cut far enough, then you'll have the dreaded glue gap. Case in point, if I were to have had a glue gap on this particular inlay, it's so large, as you can see here, it's almost the size of the board. If there was a glue gap, then the center would bow up, and when I went to surface it after gluing, because of it being bowed up, the surfacing would eat away most of the thickness of the inlay and leave a very thin piece there in the center. So when I would cut a pocket for another inlay, there would be barely anything there for the inlay to be glued to. So this way, as you can see, I can maintain the thickness of that inlay for it to remain consistent. And if you see the little dark line there at the bottom of the inlay between it and the pocket, that's the dried glue. For anyone interested, I'll share my settings in the description below. I use Vcarve Pro, so those settings will be for Vcarve. I'm going to be adding a sunset to the scene of this board, and I'm going to use Osage orange for that. Now you'll notice the grain here, and what I've done is usually if you do an ingrain inlay of sorts, or even the board, you'll cut it into squares. But this one I've left the whole grain so I can get this pattern here to give it the shape of the sun. I come up with this idea, it's kind of a secondary wasteboard. Because the inlay blank is so small, it's sometimes hard to clamp down, so I will secure it with screws. And when I would do it into my wasteboard of the CNC machine, I'd end up with little divots everywhere. And that was generally the main thing that ruined my wasteboard. I do a pretty decent job of keeping my wasteboard nice and clean, and all those little screw holes was mainly the reason why I'd end up having to resurface it. So I come up with this little secondary wasteboard, and it's worked out pretty good so far. If you ever have ambitions of doing detailed inlays like this, you're just not going to get the detail out of a 90 or a 60 degree V-bit. You're going to need something fairly narrow, and the bit that I use for my inlays is a little over 5 degrees in angle. And you got to go slow with it. The tip of this bit is so fine that if I'm not careful, I can break the tip off, and it'll ruin your day. So I'll run the feeds and speeds on the engraving bit at about 30 to 40 inches per minute and around 16,000 RPM on the speeds. And I use an 1/8 inch upcut for the clearing passes. And I run that pretty slow too, because especially on the inlay blank, because of it being such an aggressive start depth, there's really no way to control your depth of cut. It's just going to plunge all the way to the complete depth, and if you're not careful, I've broken a 1/4 inch bit, or excuse me, 1/8 inch bit as well. So you got to go slow. The wood that I'm using for the well is called Wenge, and it's a beautiful wood, but it has some drawbacks. As you can see, it's very porous, and though it's pretty dense, it's brittle, and if you're not careful, you'll tear this out. Generally, if I'm going to have some cosmetic defects, it's going to be in the Wenge, and I have to go back and do a little damage control. It's just hard to get it perfect like the others. I think walnut is probably the best wood for carving inlays. Most anything you can do on the CNC. It's my favorite. I'm also using walnut for the water, and I'm putting clouds in this scene, and I'll use this same wood for the cloud as well, so the water and the clouds will match. And I had this piece of walnut, and it had a lot of sapwood in it, and I didn't think I'd ever be able to use it. But I ended up cutting it to where the grain was kind of book matched. You can see there, and you have some very dark spots and then predominantly light spots everywhere. And I gave this a go to see if I could maybe give a little definition to the water and the clouds, and it seemed like it was a success. I'm digging it. In a lot of videos, you'll see guys when they're putting their inlays in at a glue up, you'll see them hammer them in. They'll use a wood mallet or a rubber mallet, and I did that, and I guess I'm too heavy-handed. I have split some inlays before. Despite how careful I was, I would always end up breaking it, so now I just use my hands. If you're going to do multiple inlays like this, your machine is going to have to be capable of a fair amount of accuracy and repeatability. If you see right here, I'm cutting right up next to the previous inlay, and at times, if it's a few thousandths off, it'll make it look like crap. So you've got to dial in your machine. You've got to make sure it's perfectly square. You got to be sure that your stepper distance is correct, because if you don't, that's the difference between success and failure. This is the inlay blank for the sky, what will be the clouds. And if you remember what I told you a while ago about the piece of walnut that I had that had a ton of sapwood in it, I thought I'd never be able to use it. And then I got to thinking, with the way I have this cut, you see, it's kind of book matched. I thought that would kind of give me some definition in the clouds, some light and dark, light and dark. And my gamble was correct. It turned out pretty decent. The ship was probably the scariest part of this entire project, because number one, it's the centerpiece of the whole image, and it was the most detailed cut of any of the cuts that I made. It's got some pretty sharp angles, and I used Wenge for the inlay, and like I mentioned earlier, it's fairly brittle and easily to tear out, and there was a high probability for this failing. And gluing this monster in was a chore too. Trying to get that glue in all the little cracks and crevices before the glue dried. Type Bond 3 supposedly has the most open time of any glue, but right there toward the end, it started getting a little peanut buttery with me, and I was worried I wouldn't get the inlay in it in time and it would fail. But I got it, but it wasn't without a headache. I had to have a beer after this one, man. I ain't even lying. When I was dreaming up what I was going to add to this image, being a ship and well and a, sea scene, well, it just wouldn't be complete without seagulls, right? So I cut some seagulls into it, and I used black walnut for that inlay as well. It's a darker walnut than what I use for the water and the sky, so I have a little contrast, a bit more definition. They'd stand out. I'll surface the board one more time, and then I sand and sand and sand. And I can promise you, I'd rather sit through a root canal than sand anything. This is, I guarantee you, a labor of love. I'll generally start off with about 80 grit and work up to about 220 to get a nice finish on the end grain. Here I'm cutting a 45-degree bevel in the bottom. Just adds a little different touch to it. And here I'm cutting handles, little pockets in the bottom for handles. And I didn't have to cut these very deep because I use standoffs on the bottom, rubber feet for it to sit on, so it's pretty easy to get your hands underneath to pick it up. Also use Rubios on the as a finish. The guy that's getting the board said that it would never see a knife, so I use Rubios so it wouldn't be any maintenance for it like oil and wax would have to be. And here you can see the pores in that Wenge, man. That's the only drawback about using Wenge, but it's such a pretty dark wood. It's really nice to use in inlays. I hope that everything I've mentioned here, somebody has learned something. Again, my passion is V-carve inlays, and I love doing them. I don't think I'm the best at them yet, but I'm working on it. And I can't thank you enough for watching. Please like and subscribe. If you like this video, I plan to upload some more here in the near future. So I'll see you soon. Take care.